Hi everyone, and welcome to the Venezuela Weekly News Review. So, usually this review is supposed to be a bit of a roundup of the biggest news stories of the week. Though for this episode, we're going to do something slightly different. This week, I'd like to focus on three of the biggest news stories of the week, as usual, only this time all three of these stories are more or less fake. That's right, we're looking at some of the latest fake news stories on Venezuela. So strap yourself in because we've got some A-grade garbage reporting to get through today. So the first fake news story we're looking at is one where apparently Leopoldo Lopez died, or at least came very close to it. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Lopez is one of the most prolific figures on Venezuela's far right. He's currently in prison for his role in a wave of violence back in 2014 that left dozens of people dead. But even from prison, Lopez has a pretty big following on Venezuela's right, and his death would be a pretty big deal. Now, Venezuelan journalist Leopoldo Castillo broke the news on Wednesday, reporting that Lopez had been rushed from his prison cell to a hospital, seemingly without life signs. The story was quickly picked up by the international media, and even Florida Senator Marco Rubio was following the story, tweeting to his 2 million or so followers that he had confirmed that Lopez was indeed in hospital in a critical condition. Later, Lopez's wife, Lilian Tintori, visited the hospital to visit her husband. She then complained that no one at the hospital could tell what was going on. Obviously, this was immediately interpreted by many in the opposition and in the media as well, that the government was intentionally trying to cover up Lopez's death or at least his serious health condition. Oh no. Well, actually, there was an alternative explanation. Maybe no one at the hospital could say what was up with Lopez because he wasn't there. In fact, he was in the same place as been for years, in his prison cell. So later that night, the government proved this and released a video of Lopez stating the time and the date before assuring the public that he is indeed alive and well and has absolutely no idea why anybody would think otherwise. In other words, the entire story was pure fake news. Sorry, Rubio, but you got seriously duped by the Venezuelan opposition. Moving on, here's a story that wasn't quite so easy for us to debunk. On Wednesday, there was another big protest in Caracas, which, as usual, ended with violence. Now, one of the biggest stories of the day was that the National Guard used one of their armoured personnel carriers to drive straight into a crowd of protesters. Footage of the incident went viral, prompting widespread condemnation of the National Guard's actions. And I mean, rightly so. Like, driving into a crowd, that's pretty brutal. Like, just look at this footage. It's pretty damning, right? Well, let's look at some of the other footage from the day that, strangely enough, didn't go viral. So here we have the same incident, but in this video, you can clearly see something different. You can see the crowd actually had a couple of soldiers pinned down. Those soldiers look like they're about, 1 minute away from being torn limb for limb. Then the APC comes in and rescues them. So I guess that means there's always two sides to the story, right? This brings us to our last and, personally, I think the most important story, the general narrative of what's happening right now in Venezuela. And the narrative is that peaceful protesters are being violently repressed by the government. But how accurate is this narrative? Well, Venezuela Analysis has been keeping a running tally of the deaths related to the protests. We've broken down exactly who is dying and how. And you know what we've found? We've found that of the 39 people who have died so far in connection to the protests, 13 were killed as a result of the actions of opposition supporters themselves, and only 5 of them have actually been confirmed dead at the hands of state security forces. Now, the rest, as you can probably see, are a mix of accidental deaths and cases where we just don't have enough solid information to determine exactly what happened. So what does this data tell us? Well, first of all, it does tell us there's a lot of ambiguity still, and there's still a lot we don't know about some of the deaths. But it also tells us that there are a number of instances where it's very, very possible that state security forces have used disproportionate or sometimes deadly force against protesters, and obviously this should be condemned. On the other hand, though, we see that for every protester killed by police or the National Guard, you see that the protesters themselves kill at least 2 people, often likewise either police or soldiers, but often just innocent bystanders. Now, you're not going to hear this in the mainstream media, where, as we've seen, claims from right-wing opposition are usually treated more or less as gospel, or at least assumed to be true on face value. Here at Venezuela Analysis, though, we actually critically assess the claims made by both the government and the opposition. Now, we get plenty of flack for doing this from both sides, I suppose, but as George Orwell said, journalism is printing what someone else does not want printed. Everything else is public relations. Anyway, this is Ryan Malatoucher reporting for VenezuelaAnalysis.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.